Welcome to the Millionaire Mentorship Podcast. We discuss real estate investing, entrepreneurship, and business to help you retire and become financially free. Make sure you share this podcast with someone who could benefit from it and leave us a 5-star review. It truly helps me out. This show will mentor you towards financial freedom. If I can do it, so can you.
Welcome, everybody, to the Troy Kearns Podcast. Today, I'm very honored to be with a wonderful man, Errol Musk, the father to the richest man in the world. That's got to say something right there. Welcome to the show, Errol.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, I wanted to ask you a few questions, just kind of going through, before we dive into the relationship with you and Elon and then interesting layers of that dynamic. I want to just take a step back. You've had such an interesting, unique journey on your own. Can you tell me about your early years growing up in South Africa and what shaped the man you are today?
Well, my parents were refugees in the Second World War. They came from the United Kingdom, from England, really. And they came on, refugee ship, ducking U-boats and all that sort of stuff. And actually, I'm talking about my mother. And she arrived here in 1940. And my father, on the other hand, was already here. He was also of British background. And he went into the military immediately in 1939, where he spent the next 6 years in military intelligence. And he was a crypt analyst. He was very smart, and I think he was recruited on the basis that they did at the time is how fast you could do crosswords. And he was an extraordinary crossword person. And Elon has remarked on that himself, that's all that he saw, how good he was. But at any rate, so my parents married after the war, and they were not well off, and we stayed in a refugee place called Hillbrow in Johannesburg, where all the refugees came in their thousands, really, and from Ireland and Europe and all over the show. And so I had the advantage of seeing all these sort of people. As I said, most people only had one room between two people, but we had 2 rooms. So my one room was a lounge and the other room was my parents' room. And I never even had a bed until I was about, I think the first bed I ever had was when I went back to England with my mother when I was about 10 years old. And I slept on a couch. And the effect of that was these refugees would come every night. When I say refugees, these are newcomers, immigrants to South Africa, would come every night to my parents' lounge. And mum had a piano. So they'd sing all these songs and they'd cry. Grown men would cry and then they would fight, and then they would do all sorts of things, and then they'd sing again. So I had the advantage of sort of listening to all this, because it's very fascinating stories that these people had. So it really helped me, although in those areas, I'd never seen a bicycle, but I certainly knew a lot about people by the time I was 10 years old. And so then my parents took, my father was a bit of a wreck after the war. He had the shakes, he couldn't stop shaking, and it was problem. It really affected him badly. And anyway, the thing is, my mom, he couldn't get a job, and my mom left him, and we went back to England. We spent a couple of years in England, where I enjoyed that. I was very pleased to live in England for that time. I found in England they were very good to children. And so I made my way along. I was very good at school. I managed to stay at the sort of top of the class all through school, and I got many scholarships to go to university and so forth. And and then I met this girl who was from America, although she'd been living here most of her life. That's Elon's mother, May, and her father was from Minnesota. But they'd come from Canada, in fact. They'd actually come out to South Africa because in 1950, he was someone during the war who had been a sympathizer with the, Nazis, you could say. And he was, I don't think they knew what was going on in Germany, obviously. I think they just thought it was a good idea the way Hitler ran the place. But at any rate, they came to South Africa because South Africa became a sort of extension of, Nazi Germany after about 1948. They took on all the trappings of the Germans in South Africa, entrenched apartheid here and all that sort of stuff. And, the first prime minister just spent 6 years in prison. He was in prison during the war. In fact, most of them were in prison during the war in what they called.
So you're telling me real quick, You're telling me that the apartheid was established from Nazi Germany? That's how it was established?
Yeah, well, no. The thinking of the people, the Afrikaans people, the South African Dutch people,
Yes.
were always very much, in sympathy with the Germans. I mean, from the 1900 Boer War and so on onwards. I mean, you know, Germany was for them closer to their heart than England. England was considered, and still is, to a certain extent, considered by the South African Dutch people as a sort of enemy. And so before the war, and the Afrikaners, the South African Dutch are somewhat. Many of them are descended from Germans. They were the ones who entrenched, for example, separate development or apartheid in South Africa. That was, as I say, that's what May's parents came to South Africa for. They left Canada and immigrated to South Africa to be here with these people with whom they agreed, and they were Holocaust deniers and so forth. And I had a lot of hard times with them. The old man was a very good pilot. He brought an airplane out with him from America, but I often had arguments with them about the political situation, and they'd always talk down to me and made me feel very uncomfortable. But in the end, I threw that all aside, and May and I got married. Yeah, and then along came Elon 9 months and 2 days later.
So going back a little bit, just to let you know, I have been to South Africa. You're from Pretoria, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Originally on.
Yeah, so I went there in 2011 or 10, I can't remember exactly. I went to Cape Town, Camps Bay area, and
Yes.
spent some time there. And for those of you guys listening, I mean, South Africa was one of the first places when I went there, and I'm pretty comfortable traveling everywhere, where I felt a little bit different. Like that, when you're driving around there, you see armed guards,
Yeah.
armed guards, and as you're coming out of the airport in Cape Town, you see people running across the street through the shanty town. And so one thing, and I noticed this, I went to like Worley Park and a couple other places out there, and I drove around a lot, and I didn't live there. I spent a very brief amount of time there. But one thing that I did notice is that there's a difference between the Afrikaans and then the English people there, and there's like this whole dynamic. Can you break that down for us?
Well, yes, South Africa was established. A European establishment was made in South Africa in about 1650, so it's very long ago. And they then spent this little South African Dutch community, which was actually a private company that set the place up, the East India Company.
That's right.
And
Yep.
they were here for 150 years, and they grew very slowly as a group of people. And with the Napoleonic Wars, the British were forced to take over the Cape. So in about 1800, they took over the Cape to prevent the French from doing so. And from then onwards, they established a presence in the Cape. Now, the thing is, the British have to be given credit, because when they arrived at the Cape, there were no roads, there were no schools, and so forth. And within 5 years, there were 17 schools and about 150 miles of roads.
Wow.
And so the British do bring things, with them. And this, though, was not a great thing for the South African Dutch, who were slave keepers, and they were not happy with that. And the British, of course, outlawed slavery in I think it was 1835. In fact, before that in England, but in the Empire in 1835, and of course that, to a large extent, is what drove the South African Dutch to leave the Cape and go up into the interior of South Africa and look for a new place to establish, a home and a country and so on, which is what they did. And so they've been at loggerheads with the British ever since, and I mean, it's an argument that can be made for both sides. The Afrikaans people are very fine people, very, very fine people. They may have, arrogant attitudes in some respects, but I mean, they're very fine people. And
Yeah.
of course, the British are, the greatest nation in the last 500 years. So that's, it's a bit of a two things that are quite big against each other. Yeah.
Yeah, it kind of segues into my next conversation is like, what was it like growing up in South Africa and raising Elon in South Africa? Like, as I mentioned before, I read the book recently that you said wasn't that well written, but it was Walter Isaacson's book, and he talks in that thing that there was a lot of violence in South Africa growing up, and I felt like something could happen at any point in time out there, and I guess as somebody who grew up there, what would you like to tell the rest of the world?
Well, yes, South Africa is a funny place. I mean, it's a wonderful place. It's almost a sort of Garden of Eden when it comes to the geography of South Africa. And the people are a fairly good bunch. And let me start off by saying that as far as South Africa is concerned, in terms of, a multicultural country, South Africa is at the best place now than it's ever been. I mean, it's definitely the best place now. There is no racism to be seen. Nothing, absolutely no racism. If I were to talk about racism, I'd rather think of places I've traveled to overseas in recent times, where I see far more, that. But here, no, there's racism has been really expunged. What you do have here is a certain amount of lawlessness. So the majority of the people live on about $10, if they're lucky, $10 to maybe $100 a month, depending on their good fortune. So this is very little money. I mean, no matter what you do, this just, you can't give money to people who, if you don't have the money, and people,
Right.
vast majority of the population live on very little. And I was reading that a day or two ago that there are only 7 million people among 65 million that actually have a job in South Africa. So
Wow.
there are 7 million people in the country with a job in a population of 65 million. So that gives you some idea. Now, there obviously will be a lot of people employed in sort of unofficially or day jobs or contract or helping out and so on, getting a little bit of money here there. But generally speaking, you can turn it into what do they live on? And the majority of people live on, if they're lucky, about $100 a month. If they're not lucky, well, it's much less. So it's very hard to live on that.
Yeah.
And the result is you have crime. And so it's necessary to walk around to be armed. I'm always armed, always have to be armed. And you worry a lot about your children. I unfortunately live in a relatively nice area. But again, if I travel anywhere, I have to take note of it and remember to be aware. It's very important to foreigners like yourself who come here, who have sort of utopian ideas about rushing into a bad looking area and just saying hello to everybody. You're going to get killed.
Yeah, I definitely got my spider sense when I was there. It was like, it wasn't, because I'm a world traveler. I've been all around the world, and I feel pretty much comfortable everywhere. The one place that made me a little bit nervous was South Africa, and it was just because I saw some suspect type of things, even in Camps Bay, which is a very nice area. That the whole bait and switch, and I noticed it was interesting. The South African police, I remember very specifically, as you go down that hill and it overlooks the water and you got the big ocean right there. You have these big Dutch cops that just that look like they could deal with anybody. And then as I'm driving through South Africa on my own with my my wife now, but my fiance at the time, you just you saw people hitchhiking and you see all these wineries and you see all of these wonderful things. Like you said, like the Garden of Eden. I remember driving up the hills on my way to Camps Bay and seeing just these beautiful trees, so you got this exquisite beauty. But like you said, you also have guys who are killing rhinoceroses for $30, right? Like, so going into you were married, if I memory serves me correctly, from 1970 to 1979 to Elon's mom, May. Is that correct?
From 1970 to 1980.
Okay, got it. And you guys had 3 children. You had Elon, you had Kimball, and Tosca. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and tell me about the marriage and everything in regards to that, as much as you would like to share.
Sure. Well, I came back from England to South Africa. As a matter of fact, I just want to say that as a South African boy, this was a tough place. This was a mining camp where I grew up in originally. So children had a bit of a hard time when I was a little kid. They were treated quite harshly. We were caned. You got a hiding every day whether you deserved it or not. And when I went to England and stayed
Keep
there
them
for 2
honest.
years, I was quite surprised. In the schools at that time, as young as small as you were, if you opened your mouth or didn't respond quickly enough, you got caned. Caned. They called it a cane. It's like a whoop cane, and you got caned.
Yeah.
And I remember going to England and actually discovering that they actually liked children. It was a big surprise to me in England that they actually liked children, and
Oh.
they did things for children, and everything was sort of set up for children. It was quite wonderful. But when I came back to South Africa, to give you an idea about South Africa, the first day that I came back to South Africa, my parents were not well off, and I didn't have they were better off at that time, but I didn't have the right school uniform. So they used to wear school uniforms here. And the first day that I was at school, I was challenged the very first day, I didn't know anybody at the school. I joined in the middle of the year, and I went into the class, and I was challenged to 10 rounds after school, 10 rounds. I didn't know anybody. And the headmaster of the school offered to be the referee. Now,
Hell of a guy. Hell of a guy.
If you can work that one out, then you have some idea of South Africa. Okay.
Right.
So he was going to be the referee, and I was going to get into a ring with somebody I had never seen before. And I was going to have 10 rounds with this guy.
Yeah.
And everybody was going to come and watch, you see. And there were certain comments made about me coming to school without the right uniform and so on. So it was a harsh society. And we did have the 10 rounds, by the way. I was knocked around quite a bit. I didn't really feel like hitting back because, I didn't know anybody. I didn't know them.
Yeah.
But that was typical. Anyway, at that same school was May, and she was 10 years old. I was 12. And later on, we went to the same high school. And it was only towards the end of her high schooling that I started taking her out. And so we went out for 6 years before we were married, which, of course, makes Isaacson's book rather ridiculous, because he says in the book how much she hated being with me, which was crazy because she went out with me for 6 years before we got married, and we had a wonderful marriage, and and we had these 3 children, and I did very well. I didn't want to be poor. I immediately set about making a better life for myself. I was lucky. I did well, and I was.
What did you do, Errol? What was your career?
I'm a consulting engineer. I became by fluke. I became a consulting engineer. I studied engineering, and then after university, I was offered a job with what are known as consulting engineers, which you have in America. These are the big organizations that you have there. And anyway, so this firm that I worked for was from England, and they were very famous. And they did the Opera House in Sydney and all that sort of stuff. And but they weren't giving South Africa. They treated South Africa as a sort of second-rate place, and so they treated the work they were given very poorly. This British firm where I worked, and the South African government actually gave them an ultimatum that either they do the work that's given to them properly, for the government, or they leave or they close down. So they just opted to close down. They said, that they treated us like second-class citizens. These people from England. At that time, England people were like supposed to be supermen. But at any rate, then I had an older man in this practice, and he said to me, I was 23. He said to me, do you want to, let's take over this practice. He was about 35. And so I said, okay, so we took over the practice. And my parents stood surety for me to borrow enough money to buy this practice. At the time, it was, I don't know, about $1,200,000 or something. It was a huge amount.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's corrected for today. I mean, today it would be like $1.2 million. But
yeah, no, I figured. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it wasn't $1.2 million then, but it corrected for today. But what I'm trying to illustrate is it was not a little, it was quite a lot. That
Yeah.
was to buy the library and all the furnishings and so on. The library was very important. And then I took over this practice, and we took over this practice, and it wasn't long before we got lots and lots of work. But this older man didn't like it. He was very unsure about his income and all that sort of stuff, because you never really know when you're getting paid in that sort of world. It's a difficult kind of world. And he
You
asked me if he could
you got to
leave.
collect your money, right?
Well, there's no regular payments of anything. It's a bit more like how people live like yourself today. You live on a sort of contract basis or something. But in those days, people were not used to that kind of thing. People like to know that they went to work and they received their wages at the end of the month and all that sort of stuff, and they could budget and plan accordingly. We never had anything like that. You might not get anything for 6 months in that type of business. But at any rate, he wanted to leave. So I said, okay. So he left, and I carried on my own. And I really had people beating the door down. The reason simply was that I never said no. I always said, yes, you can do it. And a bit like Elon today, my approach was, yes, you can do it. And people, what engineering is, people come to you with a vague idea. They want to build a railway line or a pipeline or some structure, and they don't know how to do it. They just have it in their minds. This is what they like to do. Then the engineers turn it into reality for them, And I never said no. And so I also quite amazed at how much you got paid as a consulting engineer. It was very big income. And, by the time I was 24, I was able to take May to Europe on a honeymoon when we got married. I actually took her for 3 weeks to Europe. I mean, I bought an aeroplane when I was 24, my first aeroplane.
Wow.
I bought May her first Mercedes Benz when she was 22.
Wow.
And I was 24. So obviously I was doing quite well. And and so we went on like that. And subsequently we bought a home which is today the home of where Elon grew up, is today the home of the European ambassador to the European Union ambassador to South Africa.
So it's not a shack.
No, it's not a shack. And before that, it was the headquarters of the United Nations for the Southern Hemisphere. That's the home in which Elon grew up. It's probably one of the 5 best homes in the city. And, so I did quite well. But, and so it was also politically, I became a city councillor of Pretoria.
What year was that you were in the city council? Was it 1980 to 83, around there?
No, I was elected 72 to 82.
72 to 82. Okay, got it. So you've always been politically kind of inclined?
No, the reason I got onto the council was because I was very interested in improving the city. But once I got onto the council, I discovered it's very political. I didn't know that. I mean, at the time, I thought it was the sort of place to be. It's like, you join a country club and you see the country club's not good, So they tell you, well, why don't you stand for office at the country club? And I said, well, okay. And the idea is you'll make plans to improve the tennis courts or something like that. That was my thoughts at the time. But I soon became heavily involved politically. And so that's what happened. And so May and I split up in 80. We just grew differently. I liked sailing, flying. She didn't like any of that kind of thing.
So you guys broke up, and then Elon lived with his mother for how long?
Initially she left me with the boys, and then she took my daughter. We had 2 complete homes at that time. Okay. So in one city 400 miles away, we had a complete home with servants, everything. And then we had the other home in Pretoria, the similar, with servants and everything. So she just moved to our other home, and I stayed in the Pretoria home. And initially she left without the boys, just took my daughter, who wasn't yet in school. And a little while after that, she came and thought she wants to take the boys as well. So I agreed to that. And then Elon stayed with her for about 10 months, I'd say. But they came up for holidays. So it wasn't 3 or 4 months after the divorce that I took all 3 children to Disneyland for 6 weeks, in Disney World, for 6 weeks in America. And that was their first introduction to America when they were 8, 7, and 5. And but about 10 months later, Elon, she sent me a letter saying Elon wants to stay with you, and she sent him up on a train all by himself, which is not a good thing. But anyway,
I did read that. That was, I thought that was kind of cool though, because For the father, my parents are divorced, and I think that like when you're divorced for some reason, I don't know if this is anybody out there, but for me, you as I think a kid, you blame yourself a little bit. Like at least
Of course.
I did, and so I think that you want to be close to your dad, you want your parents to be together. So I thought it was cool, and I know there's been some, there's rumors or whatever there is out there about the relationship between you and your son, but I felt like at some point in time that relationship was enough where he wanted to live with his father, and so and then if I recall, eventually she ended up moving back to closer to you, and the whole family kind of lived together. Is that accurate?
Well, not together, but we lived a few
I
blocks
mean,
away from.
closer in proximity
Yes,
versus 400 miles
yes,
away.
yes. Eventually, we're not far apart, and so it's possible for me to see my daughter quite a lot. And Kimball, of course, came to stay with us while he was still at primary school. He came to stay us when he still had a couple of years of primary school left, and that's when he joined me and Elon. And then they stayed with me for the rest of their school career. And people ask me, am I proud of them? I'm proud of the fact that I took them to school and back every single day and
Yeah.
fetched them. It's quite a big job. And in fact, by that time, I was probably about 34, 35 years old. I didn't really need to, sort of go to work anymore because I had a lot of shareholdings or, in the buildings that we put up. And so I didn't really need to go to work. So what I did is I sold my practice, or I really gave my practice to the engineers that worked for me.
Okay.
And I then moved to a horse farm, which we set up. I bought, and the boys and I lived there. My daughter came on holidays, so all the holidays she came. And so I was able to be like a father, or rather parent, like take the children to school, take them back to school for sport, take them back in the evening for something else, like 4 times a day, And
Yeah, it's a lot of responsibility for sure.
but Elon says he had I hear them, or rather really May, saying how they didn't have any of this and they didn't have that. And she didn't even know what school they went to. But I took them to school in a Rolls Royce most of the time. Yeah, so first I took them to school in a Shadow. Not always. Sometimes I might have used something else, but most of the time I used the Shadow. And then subsequently I used this Corniche, which is a convertible Rolls Royce, to take them to school and fetch them. Until eventually I remember Kimball saying to me, Dad, when you come to pick us up, can you just drive past the pickup point, stop about 400 meters along on the side, and we'll walk up to avoid being teased, you see, I suppose.
Yeah.
But they were used to that kind of thing, and they were used to aircraft and yachts and ocean yachts and being on the ocean. And they had a very broad experience as children. Yeah.
At one point in time, you also took them to Hong Kong. Is that correct?
Oh yeah. And I took them to Hong Kong. I took them to India. I took them to Middle East. I took them to all of Europe, America, South America. United States. I mean, Canada. Everywhere. The only place I didn't. Oh, I even took them into China. We had a permit to go into China at the time. We were purchasing products from factories that were actually allowed to operate. They were from Hong Kong, but they were allowed to operate inside China. And so we actually went through the red guard sort of guarding post and everything. This is quite funny because they told us when we go to this bridge, and it was this huge wooden bridge that you crossed over from the island, I think it was Kowloon or something. We cross into, mainland China, and they people warned us. They said they shoot you. They shoot you for no reason. And when we arrived there, I've never told anybody this story. When we arrived there, you see these red guards. You see in their khaki outfits, this little hat with a red star, and they've all got AK-47s, and they're standing in these bridges. They're standing in these watchtowers. You see. These wooden watchtowers. Right. Anyway, so when we crossed over, we had all the right permits, so there's no problem. And but Tosca, who at that stage had long corn blonde hair right down to her waist, and really, you could use it to pull a car with, type thing. And anyway, it was so strong. And anyway, these guards all came out to see her because they wanted to touch her hair, you see. And but
Yeah.
from the tunic down, they only had what looked like pajama pants on. You know,
Right.
what karate people wear, I think, or judo people wear, you know.
Yeah.
They just look like pajama pants, if you know what I mean, in white or
Yeah.
blue or whatever, which, you know, didn't even reach the ankles. And then beneath that, flip-flops, you know, flip-flops for shoes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was quite comical. And if you know what I mean. And they
Yeah.
were very,
Absolutely.
very, these Chinese guards were very, very friendly. And they had all the children sitting on their laps and all took turns taking a photograph, you know.
Awesome.
So that's an interesting experience. Yeah.
So going into like, Elon's childhood, it's kind of crazy to see that this guy becomes the richest man in the world. Obviously, that's a pretty big deal. Like, and I would say more than that is, and I know you're super proud because how can you not be? One of the things is, looking at how he went from PayPal, basically starting this other company and arguably being ousted by the guys who he's partnered with and was the king leader and kind of the guy pushing the technology, and then moving that into the next thing, which was SpaceX, and to the next thing that's Tesla, to now X, and challenging a lot of things that haven't been challenged for a long period of time, like the going to Mars and stuff like that. Tell me about like how you fostered that. I know one thing that I read about is that going into his early childhood, and there was some sort of an event that happened where it was like a seminar for computers or something. Then you took him to that one and encouraged him to stay. How did you foster that sort of
No,
that
I
sort
didn't
of
have to
thing?
foster. No, I didn't have to foster anything. They were, you know, quick on the uptake with all that sort of stuff. You know, obviously, you know, most of us, you know, people there. I mean, you look at the ability of people. It's amazing, you know, to see what people are capable of. You know, as children, they grasp, as I did. You know, when the rockets first went up to, you know, the Sputnik and so on, we all became fanatics. You know, to build rockets. You know, when I was that age, 12, I think I was 11, 12, when Sputnik went up, and I joined the Moonwatch team to. Later on, I got $1 a night to watch and measure the satellites going over. This is employed by America, in fact. And the guy who employed us, he was a South African working for the American Moonwatch team. He even had a comet named after him. But at any rate, so we grew up with that, and of course we infused that in our own children. I mean, you know, it was just the way things are. The way you see the same thing happening now with young children and computers, or you know how quickly they can use computers and how quickly they understand everything
Mm.
with computers. And so the Elon and Kimball and you know Tosca, I suppose, as well, of course, but especially Elon was very good with all this stuff. And you know he was a prolific reader, so he started
Mm.
reading quite young, but only because it was the Lord of the Rings or you know some Dungeons and Dragons creepy weirdo stuff. I mean, it wasn't that
Quite
he
the
never.
imagination, right?
Yeah, it had to be something like that. Otherwise, he wasn't reading, you know, War and Peace or anything like that. You know, he
Mm.
was reading The Lord of the Rings, and
Yeah.
you know, so you know, but these books were 3 inches thick. You know, anyway, so he was pretty fast on that. He also liked adult company a lot as a young boy. I remember that he liked to listen to the adults, and anyway, so when Atari and Commodore and VIC-20 and all that sort of stuff came out, the early little play computers. Of course, he had all of those. And then one day he came to me and he said, there's a big advert became in our Sunday Times newspaper that some at Wits University they were going to have a course on how to use a computer for ordinary
Mm.
people. I'd done
Yeah.
Fortran and COBOL programming way back in '69 for where I worked for when I got a short-term job with IBM. So I had diplomas myself in punch card operation of computers, you know, like the IBM 360. But what we were going to get was a completely new thing. And Elon showed me this, and he said he wants to go to this course. And I contacted the people, and they said no, it's not for children. Of course, the course was 2,000 at the time. I mean, here I'm not adjusting for. I'm telling you the exact price
Yeah.
of the $2,250
Wow.
for the scores, which was, if you bring that to today, well, you're talking $10,000 or something, and he to go on this course, and I thought, well, and then I did call them because he kept on and on, and they said no, they don't take children, and then he pleaded with me, and then they had an introductory course, introductory lecture that was going to be $250. So you could go to this introductory lecture which was going to be long, about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and that was $250. And so I pleaded with him, could he perhaps just go to this? And eventually they agreed if he wore proper clothing and he sat on the side and kept quiet. So off we went. We took him to this. It was at Wits, Witwatersrand University, where I had been a student, so I know the place. And we took him in there, and we left him there. Kimmel and I went and bought a meal somewhere, and we eventually came back that evening, and we saw all the people coming out of the university, but no Elon. So eventually I realized I better go and find him. So I went inside, and when I got to the lecture hall, which is one of those halls that sort of goes down, down.
Yeah.
I saw him at the bottom with his jacket off, his tie off, his white shirt sleeves rolled up, and talking to these people that were all like.
How old is he then? How old is
11,
he then?
11.
Wow.
Anyway, so then I went down there, and as I walked up to them, sort of gingerly, the one bloke turned around, a very tall guy, and he with glasses, and the very professor-looking guy. He was, in fact, a professor from England, and he turned around, and he assumed. I think he assumed I was the father, and he said, "You have to get this. You must get this boy one of these computers."
Right.
He said to me. My reaction was, "How much are they?" And one of the companies that I worked for, Hyperarmor, they build hypermarkets and so on. The CEO was standing there, and he said, "Don't worry, Errol, we'll give you a discount." But in fact, the cost of the first IBM XDA computer with a mouse and screen and all that and printer was a little less than the price of a small of the 220 Mercedes Benz.
Right.
So a new 220 Mercedes Benz was about $12,000, and this thing was about $10,000.
Wow.
And so I bought one. It was the best investment I ever made. I mean, within a short time, he was able to program. It was disk operating system, no Windows. And so he was able to program. And he was what we call today a coder. He could code anything. He could program anything you like. And
his brain was just built that way. He was just.
Yes. Yeah, he could program anything you wanted. And then time went by, a couple of years later, I seem to recall somewhere there, he said to me, he came to me, he had a little gray box with a red light on top. And he said, "You know what this is, Dad?" I said, "What is it?" He said, "This is a modem." Of course, I'd never heard the word before. And he said to me, with this thing, this gray box, metal box and red light on top, I can communicate with my computer with the computer at Oxford University. I said, "You do that?" He said, "Well, I do it through the telephone lines. I connect to the telephone lines, and the telephone lines are connected all the way to there, and this modem, and I can get any information I want that the Oxford University computer will give me if I want it, So that he was very, very quick. At that time, he also came up with a video game, which he showed me, where, he called it Blastar, and where, these flying things come and you have to try and shoot them out of the air and all that sort of stuff on the screen. And I thought this was rather brilliant. And I sent it to PC Magazine, which is what we had there at that time.
Yeah.
And they said they want to publish it. And they paid him, they paid him then about $700. So I imagine he would have got, in today, a lot more than $700 if you look at it today. Yeah, so that I kept that program for many years. And then I sent it to him a couple of years ago. Do you remember this?
At this point in time, what are you thinking as a father? Are you thinking you got something special here?
No. We've always been people who've been quite big achievers in our little world. I was telling you about myself. My brother, he had no chance whatsoever to go to university. because he had no money to go to university. But he won the Norristown Laboratory is a big place here. He won their golden scholarship or something, and Norristown Gold, and they put him right through university as a doctor. And so, he's a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. His two sons are the highest ranking school leavers in South African history.
So you've got good genetics.
Yes, our high schooling system here is the British high schooling system. So it's a little more. It's almost like college level at university, And they completed that with what we call 10 A's each, which is unheard of. It was all in the newspapers. But they run Twitter now, X. They run X now, So yeah. So
this is his cousins.
Yes.
Okay, so fast forward, he moves to America. Obviously, the upbringing is, he's got a desire to. I think he moves to Canada first, right?
Yeah. No. I sent him to America with the idea that he'd go to the University of Texas.
What was the thought process on that, Errol?
Well, when he finished school, he'd been with me to the US a few times, twice at least. And when he finished school, I wanted to ask him about studying, and he said, well, he may as well go to the local university. So he went to the local university in Victoria, which is a good university. And but he was very unhappy. He was very unhappy. He studied economics, which is also not particularly interesting. But at any rate, he after 6 months or so, I could see he was very unhappy. So on a particular holiday that we were due to go out, he didn't want to even get out of bed. It was, I think it was about end of May 31st. And so I went and pulled him out of bed, and he looked, half asleep, and he said, I don't want to go anywhere. And then I said to him, I sat on his desk, on the edge of his desk, and he sat on his bed, forlorn and so on. And I said to him, you're not happy, are you? And he said, no, he's not happy. He's very unhappy. And I said to him, the thought came to me just like out of the blue, And I said to him, would you like to study in America? And then he said, yeah, he just woke up. He said, yes, you see, just like that. And so I said, okay, well, let's do that then. And so tomorrow I was a member of Rotary, and one of our Rotarians, was the American commercial attaché, which is quite handy because I was able to get hold of him and, ask him to help Elon. And so Elon went to see this man, and this man gave him a pile of books on university and so on in America. And one was a list of all sort of a government book with cheaply printed sort of thing, but good, about all the universities and what they cost. And so the cheapest one was the Texas University, which was possible for me because at that time already we were falling behind. Yeah. Whereas the rand had previously been worth more than the dollar. Now the rand was worth several times less than the dollar, if you know what I mean. So Texas
the economy is
University,
suffering.
Yeah.
The economy
so Texas University was possible for me, and the others were just not possible. And so the idea was he'd go there. But in the travels that he did, he decided to spend a year moving around. We had family there because of his May, and then I had friends there, of course, in the United States that I'd picked up in my travels there. And so he moved around the US for a year and Canada, and then said, Dad, I'm going to go to Queen's University, in Kingston, in Canada. So I said, okay, that's cool. And then he started there doing economics. He was there 2 years, and somehow or other he was moved. He got picked up and spotted and went to Wharton. So he finished 2 years at Wharton, and then he said he wants to start a business. And I said to him, look, South Africa at the time was going through terrible, terrible times economically. I mean, in '94, this was in '94. Yeah. We had gone over to a black government. So the way people were looking at the future here was get the hell out of here.
Right. I know a lot of people were leaving.
Yes, you have to get on, and no one was prepared to put money down on a new development. And I was living, I was a person who designed things. I mean,
Mm.
I had to, I kept various clients after I started living at home with the children, but I never got any work from about 1985. And fortunately, I fell into a business called Emeralds. I started selling emeralds by
Mm.
chance. That's another story. But um,
Yeah.
in '94, things were really tough, and you couldn't sell anything. And so they said they wanted to start a business, and I said, "Look, you have to wait for Kimball. He's 1 year behind you, and if he's
Yeah.
out, then you can do it together, and then I'll sell whatever I've got." I had a bush lodge that I built in a nice place in the Big Five area, and I had a yacht, a big ocean-going yacht. I sold the ocean-going yacht for a quarter of its value, you know,
Mm.
and I sold the bush lodge for about a third of its value, and then I sent them the money. It wasn't much, but it kept them going for 6 months before they were able to get venture capital money, which was a huge amount of $4 million. And then they were set, and then off they went on putting the American newspapers onto the internet.
Yeah, it's interesting, when you're telling me that we've met a lot of people that have moved from South Africa for the exact same reason that you talked about, Errol. Like, I know some Israeli guys that lived in South Africa and then left because of things changing so much. So, where I want to come back to Elon, but where is South Africa now? Because it seems like it went through some stuff in the 90s and maybe early 2000s. Where is it at currently?
Well, as I said earlier, South Africa as a place for multiculturalism is at the best that it's ever been. There's no racialism here. It's gone.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks racialistically anymore. And that's rather great. I would say it's wonderful. Absolutely no, you just don't see it. And it's rather nice. We've white people have seen many black people working in, banks and all sorts of more complicated jobs, and they do such a good job that the people have like woken up, and
Yeah.
so there's no problems on that level. Where we do have problems is where the blacks community just keep all their government, they run the government, and they keep
Mm.
all the government's departments totally black, and
Mm.
they as a result they don't function too well, and it's more like giving DEI there, where they're giving jobs to
Yeah.
people who are not
Yeah.
qualified to do the job.
Affirmative action.
Yes, well, yes, they're giving jobs to their own people, but they're not qualified, and
Yeah. It's
that's
like
a serious
reverse
problem.
racism a little bit.
Yes, but on the other hand, on the private sector, things are great. So these days, where white people in South Africa accepted the fact that we have to pay taxes to provide schools and hospitals and so on for the black people, which is what we did, and we had great schools for them. I know because I was involved in about 54 of those schools,
Mm.
and hospitals, and which I designed. Some of them I was involved in the design of. Very good. But nowadays, the blacks are there for themselves. They have to fend for themselves. And today, white people in South Africa, you might say, fend for themselves. They don't have to worry about, the result is, I suppose you could say the white community is well off, very well off, better well off than they've ever been, because, all the businesses, it's not because they are worthwhile. They start all the businesses,
Yeah.
and it's not about keeping anybody down. It's just that the ability is more like on the one side than the other, But
Just to take you off track, because I like doing this every once in a while. There was a movie I watched several years ago about this South African bank robber. Do you remember this guy?
yes, Andre
I think it
Stander.
was Stander. Yeah, like he was I think he was a cop turned bank robber.
Yeah,
It was an amazing story I think he was out of Johannesburg, if my memory
yeah,
serves me correctly. But do
yes,
you remember that?
yeah, very well, very well, very, very well. I probably met him. I probably knew him because at that time I was very involved in just about everything in Pretoria. So I probably met
Yeah.
him. I probably bumped into him at least once, But yes, I remember the story. He was police captain who had become terribly disillusioned with the things that he was having to do. And we were
Yeah.
all, not only him, we
Yeah.
were all, many of us were the same, because in order to keep the the apartheid structure going,
Yeah.
they had to resort to harsh treatment of people, in the black areas, and
Yeah.
it was terrible. I mean, I can't make excuses for it. And he just got
Yeah.
sick and tired of it. He said, "This is ridiculous." He said, "I'm
Yeah.
doing this anymore. This is crazy." He just
Mm.
went totally off the rails. His father was a general his father was, in our police, we had a ranking system, whereas your police top people are called sheriffs and commissioners or something. We actually call them generals. I think we picked it up from the British,
Yeah.
So his father was a general in the police force. In fact, I think he was a major general, and so that's pretty harsh. But he a fascinating story, and I happen to know he bought a yacht to try and escape the country, and I happen to know the person who owned that yacht because I had a yacht there as well in the same place. So it was a story we all know. A very sad story.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever get a chance, if you're listening right now, check that movie out. It's amazing. It's a great. I think he ends up getting killed in Miami, Florida, or something like that.
Yes. No, he basically just handed himself over. Said, "Shoot me." Yeah. No, he arrived after the harshness of his life in South Africa.
Yeah.
He arrived. I've experienced this. He arrived in Miami Beach.
Yeah.
Not Miami Beach.
Yeah.
And everybody there is just youngsters. They've got everything. They've got everything that can open and shut. They've got everything.
Beautiful women.
They don't know the first meaning of hardship. And suddenly he's thrust in among them. And just life had no meaning after that. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's tough. So going back to so where are you guys at now in terms of your relationship? You've watched a lot of things. You currently live in South Africa. I know you're kind of moving around a little bit.
Yes, I've spent I came back a few days ago from Abu Dhabi. I was from the United Arab Emirates. I was invited there to Dubai and so on by the government. And I went there and spent 2 weeks. I met all the sheikhs and, we had tremendously good time, a pleasant time with them. They flew us out into the desert to have dinner with the royal family in a Bedouin tent, in a helicopter and so forth. And and then as it happened there, when I was having lunch 2 weeks ago, Friday 2 weeks ago, I was the guest of honor of Sheikh of Abu Dhabi, which is one of the Emirates, the biggest emirate. And who should walk in? I was the guest of honor, and there were 200 people for lunch. These guys don't do small lunches. There were 200 people for lunch. And I was the guest of honor. I was sitting right at the top with the sheikh in this huge, beautiful room. And who should walk in the bottom but Kimball, my younger son. And he'd also been invited. Yeah, I was invited. And he'd been in Qatar, which was nearby. And he has a private jet, and he was there. So they invited him to lunch, somebody else. And there the two of us were, and I ran over to him and, with the sheikh, if the sheikh stands up, everybody stands up. If the sheikh sits down, everybody sits down. But anyway, everybody sat down. And as soon as Kimball walked in at the bottom, I just got up and ran over to him. Anyway, the sheikh was wonderful about it and treated us extremely well. And so Kimball and I had a good time together there. We would have gone on together, but I was on my way to see the king of Morocco, and he was on the way to see somebody similar.
Muhammad the Sixth or Muhammad the Fifth?
Don't ask me.
I was just in Morocco. I was just just there.
The king of Morocco. So we went to meet the king of Morocco. He was with a party of people at a hotel, the biggest hotel, most magnificent looking hotel I've ever seen. It's in Abu Dhabi.
Oh, wow.
And he invited us for lunch. Oh, not for lunch, for like afternoon tea or something. I think he thought we were coming for lunch as well. But we just had lunch with this sheikh, so a bit of a complicated, trying to please them all, And so, so Kimball couldn't come with me to that. And I asked him to come with me, and he was going on to something else. But it was lovely to see him there. Yeah, it was great.
How is your relationship with your son now? Elon specifically, yeah.
Very good. I mean, Elon, I was 6 months. No, it's not. Oh, sorry. It's December last year at the launch of the Starship. He wanted me to come, so I went over to the Starship launch, and we did it together. We saw it together, and it was great. We had a terrific time together. Obviously, you must realize my sons are very, very busy. You know, they go from one thing to another. And, you know, their lives, half the time, I don't know if it's worth it. But at any rate, so I went over and spent time.
Yeah, we all wonder that, right? Like it's, I mean,
something rather nice happened there. After the launch, which was quite a big success. Since then, there have been more successful launches, but that was a big success, really. And in the evening, we had a big party, you know, just for the SpaceX employees. And at the, you know, at the rocket headquarters, I don't know what they call it, some fancy name. And Thunder City or something, I don't know. Anyway, and we having this big, like, Hawaiian party or something like that. And everyone was having a good time. And then Elon stopped the proceedings and said, everyone put his arm around me, said, I liked it. It was very nice for him to do that. So this is my dad. He taught me everything I know about engineering.
Wow.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Well, you know, obviously I said, no, immediately said, no, that's not true. You taught yourself a lot. But, you know, it was very nice, you know, and very kind of him. And, you know, so, yeah. But of course, he was talking to super geniuses, all of them, you know.
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the I just recently had a fire at my house. One of my barn burnt down, and I had you know, it was so, as you know, in the United States, it was so even. You had to hide it, basically. You had to hide that you were a Trump fan, and I mean, because people didn't want to do it until your son came out and fully supported after he got shot in the head. And said, I mean, it was kind of like. Very much, we were the silent majority, quote unquote. So I believe that your son had probably the biggest influence by when he bought X, where he bought Twitter. You know, what do you think about the Trump? I know you have some opinions about politics and whatnot about the United States.
No, look, I followed Trump's career because I was in the same career, property development, because ultimately the type of work I did became property development, you know,
right?
And you become a shareholder in the things and so on. Anyway, yeah. So I followed his career, you know, especially, you know, he removed all the derelict railway sidings in Manhattan and put up beautiful buildings, and you know, against tremendous opposition and so on. Yeah, I followed him, and then in 1977, I think I went over to the United States with a group of property owners, South African Property Owners Association. We went as a group, and we went and we met him. We were introduced to him. I vaguely remember it. I vaguely remember how kind he was and smiling and making sure everybody, you know, had whatever it is that was being offered. And, you know, very kind person. He was very warm. That's what I recall. And then over the years, of course, I followed his career. Then in 2015, you know, I wasn't terribly concerned about circumstances. I just, you know, Obama hadn't really done any damage, I suppose, enough to worry about it, or didn't seem to me. But in 2015, when Trump announced that he was going to be president, then, or to stand for president, I was, oh, wow, he's the same as us. You know, this is our kind of guy, and this is good. This is good. So I told my boys, you know, I said, and I started telling everybody, you know, this is going to be a new, you know, era. This guy should win. He's going to win. I'm sure he'll win. And, you know, and I found here in South Africa, it was all right. But then on one occasion, for my 70th birthday party, Elon and Kimball came over to South Africa with about 25 Americans. And I mean, some of them had been in the Jungle Book, the movie, you know, like Scarlett Johansson and Jennifer Lawrence. I forget the names of the men. But at any rate, and John Favreau, he was the director, you know, and there were about 25 of them. And also one of the heads of Google, I think, was there. And anyway, and children, a whole lot of children. They came in private jets, and they took over a big restaurant here in Cape Town for hours. We took this whole place over, you know, in fact, the whole block was security banned.
So there's some clout in that room.
Yeah. Anyway, so they had this tremendous party for me, this fabulous, great party. Anyway, after the meal, John Favreau leaned forward, and we were all on really good terms and laughing and having a good time. And then John Favreau leaned forward and said to me, I don't know if he referred to me as Mr. Musk or Errol, I don't know. But he said to me, Mr. Musk, I believe you support Trump.
Yeah.
And he burst into laughter, you know.
Yeah.
I think I said, yeah, yes, I do. They all burst into laughter. The whole lot of them, the whole 25 started rolling around. But not Elon and Kimball. And, you know, it was quite embarrassing. And then Favreau said to me, why? So I said, well, you know, he's just like us. You know, he's just like, I looked at Elon and Kimball. I said, I mean, he's just like us. You know, he's the same as us. And they laughed and said, no, you know, he's at this and he's at that and he's at this and he's at that. I said, but why? Why do you? Anyway, it was a bad situation. The meal ended roughly on that, around that sort of time.
Politics will do that, right?
My sons, yes. And my sons came to me, and Kimball was very, very cross. Why did you do this? Why didn't you say something else? You could have said something else. You could have said, I said, well, you know, I didn't think. I just didn't think. And Elon said, don't you realize Trump is evil? You know? And I said, no, I don't know where you come with that. I said, see, I think he's like us. I've met him. I said, he's a nice person. I thought he was a nice person. Anyway, yeah, so I felt pretty bad about that. And, you know, and after that, we never really communicated much. Even when Trump won the election, we never said anything about it, you know, because, you know, and then, of course, along came Biden. You know, we never really discussed it much. I just presumed they were going to stay that way, the boys. Anyway, then along came Biden, and in 2021, Biden invited all the electric car manufacturers, you know, to the White House for a week-long discussion on electric cars and how they to turn America into an electric car only country by 2035. And they invited all the car makers except Tesla.
Yeah.
Now in that year, Tesla had built, it was the end of that year, Tesla had built 1 million cars, and they'd sold them, all of them. And they had orders for another 400,000. And so Elon couldn't understand that, what happened. And then Biden introduced the woman who apparently ran or CEO of GM Motors, introduced her as the leading electric car manufacturer leader, you know, in America. And the GM had only made 26 cars that year, but they'd never sold any. And so Elon couldn't get this. He couldn't understand, what have I done? Because in his book, he played along. He'd done everything they wanted. You know, he was kissing their asses. He was doing everything he wanted. They wanted. He couldn't understand what was the problem. And then following that, in the January that followed, Elon started making, you know, you can imagine, he started making statements that were then put into the press, and he was saying this government's got it's got its cart before the horse, or something like that, you know. It's a no good government. And then of course he got massive backlash on Twitter, and then he couldn't understand what was going on. He always thought he was a very popular person, you see, from what he'd done, and he was. And then he discovered all these, you know, things that he's a POS, left, right, and center, you know, and then he was told that. Then he was told that Twitter is actually a Democrat arm of the Democrat government. It's not a private organization. It's supposed to be, but it's run by the Democrats, and it's a propaganda arm. And so he said, okay, if that's the case, I was talking to him a lot at that time and saying, get your bodyguards behind you, you know, get lots of bodyguards. They're going to kill you because of the things he was saying. And, you know, he was actually saying, you know, Biden's an arsehole, you know, type of thing. And it's not far off.
It's not far off.
No, but since then it's become quite normal to say that. But then it was quite new. And anyway, so he said he's going to buy Twitter. And we valued Twitter at that time at $7 billion, you know. And but they pushed the price of Twitter up to try and stop him until they reached $44 billion. But he said, okay, I'll still buy it. And they had the courts forcing him and everything. But he bought it. And now Twitter does, or X does, 10 times the volume that it did then. And it has like 15% of the number of people, you know.
Well, just to let you know how much I respect your son and what he's done is, I didn't give a crap about Twitter. We have a pretty big social media influence across all the socials, but you always know if you put something on Instagram or Facebook, it's probably going to get, if you say something incorrectly, they're going to monitor it.
Yeah,
X is like a free for all,
yeah,
and when on there now, it's like each night I go on there, I find out what's going on. I get
yeah,
I get the real news, and
yeah,
the funny thing about that, Errol, is you watch these political manufacturers, these parrots. Like once they get like, oh, now we're gonna call this guy President Musk, which is their new thing.
that's the new thing.
We're going to try to pin this guy against his ally to make the other guy's ego go
Yeah,
backwards, right? And you can
yeah,
see this. It's just this game, this political
so
game.
obvious.
Yeah, it's crazy to see, and I think that, and it's kind of cool to also watch the whole story. If you know Elon's story is like, hey, he started with PayPal, he started with this financial thing, and he's almost back where he started now with this application that is going to
Yes,
be the money, the news, the everything. The other thing that we haven't talked about, and I know we're running out of time here, but the other thing that's quite impressive that is just at the forefront we haven't even touched on is the Starlink, which was like
oh yeah,
just something that he created because of his passion to launch rockets. But now
yeah.
he's basically got the whole internet in the sky.
Well, yeah, what happened there was we were still, apart from, I don't remember the political issues coming into play then, but in around about 2016, he said to me, when I was over there, that wasn't here in South Africa, I was over there. He said to me that because they'd started having success with the Falcon 9, you see a lot of success.
Yes.
And this year they've launched, one, 2 or 3 a week. I don't know if you know
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
So the last count's about 107. But at any rate, at that time, he was saying that he wants to get to Mars, but the costs are so high, And then he said what he's going to think of doing is he's thinking of an internet system with satellites, and he figures if he can he's going to have to put up 60,000 satellites.
He's at
I mean,
like 4,000 right now, right? 4,000 or something?
8,000 at the moment.
8,000 right now.
Yes, but what's happened is the technology has improved so much that instead of 60,000, they don't need that. They only need, you probably need less. They probably need 5,000, but there's 8,000 up at the moment. But the technology improved so much that they don't have to have 60,000. But at the time, he figured he's going to have to put 60,000 up. And he figured that the income from that, he said to me, would be about $80 billion a year. And with that, he could fund the Mars project, you see. So the purpose of Starlink for him was a way to fund the Mars project.
Yeah.
Now, of course,
crazy.
Starlink has now come into its own as probably one of the most innovative things in the world ever.
It's gonna be the biggest one of them all. If you look at everything, the ability to connect, he is going to, with that thing single-handedly, in my opinion, you could take PayPal out of it, you could take everything out of
Yes.
it. The internet in the sky, the ability, like building the ecosystem or building the fiber optics in the sky, like you beat your competition.
But there's another aspect to it. It's that the Starlink in countries like in Africa, and certainly in Africa, and we also have it in Brazil, because I'm active in Brazil, but I mean, it's not only Brazil, there's Peru and all the whole of South America and many places. There are many, many people who have absolutely no possibility to, they're only now getting opportunities sometimes to use a phone,
right?
Cell phone. And so Starlink means that you can give Wi-Fi to everybody. And we are planning, I'm planning with a company here to give free Wi-Fi to everyone in need of it in the whole of Southern Africa below the equator. There's 200 million people. And to give not to those in need, we want to give them a handheld device for access to Starlink and access a certain amount of data. And we want to do that free. And if we do that, we'll create economic units out of every one of these people who today are really not economic units. They're simply oxygen breathers, that's all. And so
suckers.
And so, the minute somebody sees on a Wi-Fi or on the internet and you access the internet that you can buy a pair of socks that have got your name on it or something like that, they'll think of working for that, and finding the money to send for that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
And
inspiration.
yeah, so everyone becomes an economic unit. So Starlink has turned out to be that, and it's almost certainly going to be the biggest IPO in history. It's worth about $1 trillion, and so yeah, it's going to be the biggest IPO in history.
Are they planning on going public?
Yes, people already. Yes, there's no reason for them not to go public because it's a for-profit organization,
Yeah.
And so, whereas SpaceX and Falcon 9 and all that sort of stuff are really for need and so on, they're not for profit, Going to Mars is certainly not for profit.
No.
If you so, at least at this stage. But Starlink will be for profit. So therefore, an IPO and public ownership is great. And so there are many brokers already taking. You can now go and buy shares in Starlink, not in Starlink, but they are preparing for the IPO, so that you buy into a brokerage that's preparing its offer to purchase in when the time comes. You know what I mean?
Yes. The underwriting process is in the preliminary stages.
Yeah. So there are places that are taking purchases for Starlink based on Starlink becoming an IPO. Yeah. No. And now Starlink, as Elon said to me 12 months ago, in 2025, Starlink will be by cell phone. No more base sets, which is pretty weird.
No more what?
No more base sets.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Now, previously, up till now, you had to put a base set down. Now, base sets had about we call it a kilometer, but let's say a half a mile around the base set. You could use a telephone up to half a mile from the base set. But as you get further away, it's not that good, if you know what I mean. You start to lose speed and all that sort of stuff. But so the actual effectiveness around the base set was probably more around about 200 meters around the base set, And you buy a base set for, it was $1,000. I think it was $2,000, and now it's down to $400.
$350. Yeah, $350,
yeah,
$400.
Like that.
Yeah.
But Elon, they wanted to go to the cell phone, so you'll buy a cell phone that's enabled for Starlink. And that in 2025, he said, well, they've already started cell phone enabled Starlink in New Zealand. So you can buy a cell phone in New Zealand to take you to Starlink, and it will be 2025 everywhere. So I don't know how it's going to affect Apple, but it's going to affect somebody.
Yeah, I mean, he could pretty much cut them out if you build the infrastructure and everybody relies on your infrastructure and you control the infrastructure. I mean, he played the long game better than anybody else. Well,
yes, I mean, he's in a very difficult and also interesting position. I mean, he controls communication. Like with the Ukraine war, they asked him to provide the Ukrainians with Starlink. And he said, well, I'll do it, but you have to pay us. This was in the beginning of that 2 years ago or something, in February, about 2 years ago. And they didn't pay him. And so he said, well, I'm cutting it. So he cut Starlink to Ukraine. And the Pentagon went berserk. And they started making threats and all kinds of things. And he just said, I'm not putting it on again. And you owe us $400 million. So the big shots at the Pentagon rushed over to see him. I think he was in Germany at the time, and they promised that they undertook to give him the $400 million by June of that year, and they did. And so then immediately they agreed to that. He then put Ukraine back on, and and so he also cut Ukraine off when they were going to launch cruise missiles at the Russian fleet in Sebastopol. He cut Ukraine from the Starlink so that they had no communication. He didn't want to be the one who's responsible for something like that, which is a World War III thing, And he's very good. And recently, as recently as last year, a year ago, so I received a call from Hamas. I don't know if you heard of Hamas.
Yes.
Hamas.
Yes.
They asked me if I can.
Nice guys.
No, not really. But I mean, they've got their argument, let's face it.
Yeah.
And they asked me very nicely if I can speak to Elon about them having Starlink in Gaza, for this Israeli invasion and so on. And I put that through to Elon, and Elon agreed. He said, "Look, I'm giving you Starlink in Gaza for humanitarian purposes, supposedly." But so there's a certain amount of power with something like Starlink,
For sure. I think that the most power. I mean, you're able to see everything. And if you want to put cameras on them, you're able to connect everything. Like I didn't even think about the cell phone being able to be like the actual modem or whatever you
Yeah.
want to face it.
Well,
So
that makes all the sense in the world.
it does make a lot of sense. I never even thought about it, but until you mentioned it.
Cell phone enabled Starlink. So a year from now, you probably won't know anybody who hasn't got a Starlink enabled phone. A year from now.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Or they may, I don't know what they'll do with existing phones. I don't know how they're going to do it. But it just improves all the time. So I'm not too surprised.
Yeah. What do you think? What do you think's next? I mean, what do you think is like this guy is like, you got to be so proud as a father to see this, like,
well, I'm happy,
of all your family and especially your sons. I know they started together and everybody seems like they have a good relationship.
I'm relieved that they've done well. I mean, it's very nice. I worry about them. You have children, so you know what I mean. I'm not worried that about them. That's the thing. A parent worries. More than proud walking around with walking around like that. No, you proud if they do something nice. If they're nice to their friends, and I think then you're proud.
Well, you always know, like, it's one of those things, the more successful you go, you got a lot more enemies. You've got a lot more people that are after you.
Yeah, of course.
You got a lot of people who act like they're your friends who really aren't your friends.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
Yeah,
no, that's true. Yeah.
Well, Errol, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. I appreciate you gracing us with your time. For people who are interested in connecting with you, is there a way to follow your story, your journey?
Well, I have a lot of interviews on YouTube, and I imagine the other social media, the other things that you can look onto, so they can follow there. I mean, there's quite a lot of interviews. I did one last night with Greece Television, TV, Mega TV they call it, and I think the day before I did it on a radio station. So that was yesterday afternoon, rather, and then last night with Mega TV in Greece, and so forth. So these things get put out, and you can find them, and you can see what's what. Otherwise, people can contact me, and then I try and tell them what's going on.
Well, you're a fascinating guy with a fascinating family, and I also know that you're. You guys have, when I heard you laugh earlier, I was like, oh my God, you guys got the same exact laugh. You know what I mean?
That's true.
And you guys look, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I know there's a lot of things that are out there about, like, not getting along and that, but I know that,
that's not really true.
I don't believe it. That's why I always like, yeah.
I mean, I have a situation right now in the family, here. I'm here with my ex-wife at her place. She's got a place on the beach, and all the kids are here and everything. Our two daughters, they're out from Texas and so on. And she had a row with her sister, who was normally with us every Christmas, but she's not here now because they've decided they're not talking to each other. You see, I mean, it's just that's family. You say to them, I say to her, well, that's silly, and then they say, oh no, it's not. And then I know, of course, in a short time, maybe a month or two from now, or 3 months from now, maybe something like that, they'll be back here, and then I shouldn't say anything, because if I say anything,
they'll bring up the past, Errol. That's all in the past.
So, that's families, and, so that's all there's to it. It's just that when you are, your family's well known, and your dirty washing is out to dry or something, and people can see, and they say, "Oh, look there,"
Nobody's perfect. Everybody puts their clothes on the same way, and everybody.
Our family's on very, very good terms, and I hadn't seen Kimball for 4 years. The last time I saw him was at his sister's wedding in 2019 in Colorado Springs, and I hadn't seen him for that period of time, which is quite a long time, but it included COVID, which was a period when nobody could move, you know. But at any rate, but when we were at Abu Dhabi this lunch, you know, we were just, everybody was around us, standing around the two of us. And when we left, you know, Kimball, you know, he's a very emotional, he's more sentimental and emotional than Elon. And he put his arms, he's tall, you know, 6'5", put his arms around me and he said, "Dad, I love you so much," you know. And so you remember, you realize, you know, these sort of arguments about politics and all that, they don't really mean anything, you know, in the long run. If you
Life
know
is
what I mean.
short. Life is short.
Yeah. You must, as a man, you learn. I've learned with women and, you know, and families and everything as a man, best to keep quiet. It's best to agree with everything, you know. Just agree. Just say yes. That's a good idea. You know, whatever they want to do, just say that's a good idea.
You're not wrong on that.
No, I know.
You know, one thing that drives me crazy. I know I've been in real estate. You have a strong background in real estate. It's like, why doesn't this guy get a goddamn house? Like, get a dang house. Like build this. You know, Elon has the ability to build whatever he wants. Like,
but he's got the jet, eh? His jet is custom styled inside because he's as Kimball said to me way back 17 or something. He spends one night a month at home, and so luckily for Kimball, his first wife had her own sort of career, and so they broke up. Now Kimball's got a wife that goes with him. She's got a master's degree and everything, but she's thrown it away and she goes with him everywhere he goes. She was in fact in Abu Dhabi with us, but she didn't come to lunch because women are not allowed to come to lunch.
Oh yeah.
Can you believe it? It's only men, only men. And so he's got this woman who goes around, Christiana. She goes around with him everywhere, which is rather lovely for him. He's got a life. And Elon is still single. He's got a very close girl now, and that's Siobhan. But she's very occupied. She's a PhD working at Neuralink, you know. So she's also not going to throw everything away and just walk around behind Elon. So there's a loneliness attached to that kind of lifestyle, if you understand what I mean. And where was I now? So anyway, you talk about a house. He hasn't any purpose. He had a house on 240 acres just outside San Francisco, which is a beautiful area south of San Francisco. I don't know if you know the area. Palo Alto's there and everything.
Yes.
And and he had this on 250 acres. This thing was built in the early 1900s or late 1800s. It's like a Gothic home with about 180 rooms. And it was just left standing with caretakers cleaning it, that's all, for a long time. I think he sold it now. But the funny thing is, his cousin Jamie, who's much younger than him, Jamie's only 30, 31, 32 now, and Jamie was sent there. He was going to go to Twitter to take over Twitter, and he was he's a Berkeley graduate in science. But anyway, he went to this place. He was given this place to go and stay at, and he was so frightened that he kept his phone on all the time. He never never switched his phone off, so he could constantly be in touch with somebody while he's in this place, this spooky place, which I think is quite funny. And even
I just think he should build. I think he
got up to go to the lavatory. If he wanted to go to the lavatory, I was told he first phone his father and keep his father on the line all the time. He's on the way to the lavatory in this building. Anyway, so Elon has no use for things like that. You know, where he lives now in Boca Chica, he's got two modules that are like square, and they push the two together, and then between them they've got a space about 3.5 yards wide, which they've turned into a sort of barbecue spot, you know, between the two buildings with a lean-to roof over it. And the one he lives in and when I was there with the little boy, X, and then and a couple of bodyguards, the main bodyguards, Justin and so on, and then the other side is just bodyguards. And he's happy with that, but he's playing. He's got a masseuse, he's got a chef, you know, everything. So in the plane, it's different.
Yeah.
you know.
I think just from the ability to build cool shit, and the fact that you're engineers, like, why doesn't he just build Tesla towers or something? Some just massive skyscraper, because at this point in time it's just writing a check and
Well, yes, I mean, he'll probably get to that. At the moment, what we're looking at the moment is there are two subjects which you might find interesting. I'm sure you'll find interesting. There are two subjects that are very important if the general vision that people have of the future, you, me, everyone has of the future, if that's to ever come true and be like that, we have to overcome gravity, you know. And the second thing we have to overcome is creating nuclear power without the, the downside of radioactive materials, which is fusion.
yes.
So, we have to conquer fusion, we have to conquer gravity. And so those are the two subjects that we are looking at now as the next thing. You can't, if you take any movie or anything, book you've read or something, or that, your kids go and see, or you go and see, and you see this, this craft rises up in the air and then it goes off into the space and all that sort of stuff. Or even when I was in Abu Dhabi, they've got the Museum of the Future. And it has a situation where you go into a sort of pod and it rises up from Earth, and you see Earth disappearing, through the portholes. And then it goes into space, and it goes, and you lock on at the International Space Station, where you get out. And now you walk around the International Space Station. It's a wonderful exhibit. It must have cost an absolute fortune to build this thing. But of course, it presupposes that they've conquered gravity. Do you understand?
Yeah.
The pod goes up.
Yeah.
So the general view, that the image that people hold in their minds of what the future will be, that's what we think the future will be. If you see any futuristic paintings or pictures or videos, they show all that as though that's been accomplished. Do you follow? And it hasn't been. And if we don't accomplish that, then there's going to be very little difference between 2024 and 2124.
Yeah.
You see? We'll still be this. And, so that's what we're looking at now. And of course, more intense, more energy dense batteries, So we're trying to build a battery that is as energy dense as gasoline. Gasoline is, as you know, is energy dense. A gallon of gasoline is massive amount of energy. You know what I mean? So one wants to build batteries that are as energy dense as gasoline. And so we're getting there. We are getting it. So it's going to happen. But the gravity and thing. So we're looking at opening a science institute. We're not sure where. I suggested we open it in Dubai, because it's a very futuristic place and it draws on all nations. Whereas if it's America, it will be too American. And Europe you can forget about. And so we think to draw these nutters, these crazies who come to this place and come up with the answers, if you know what I mean. They're the sort of guys that will solve this, are the sort of guys who live on McDonald's, you know what I mean? McDonald's and play video games, if you know what I mean. Their whole lives are McDonald's and video games. But those are the guys with the answers. You got to get them together. You with me on this?
Yes.
You understand what I'm getting at?
I am.
So it'll be a science institute that will be the Musk Institute, which will be like the Academy of Sciences that Napoleon created, and the Royal Institution and so forth. And where they will be free to eat as many McDonald's as they like, but they have to come up with answers. You know what I mean?
It's like a little mouse and a reward of cheese, right?
Yeah. But you know what I mean?
I do.
So that's what we're looking at. And although it sounds crazy, that's actually what we are talking about. Gravity. What are we going to do? So you're talking about Starlink and, what was the other stuff? And we are actually thinking, what about gravity now?
Wow. That's amazing.
So you're one of the few people to know about that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with me. Yeah, it's Errol, I really appreciate you coming on Christmas Eve and spending your time with me. And it's been an absolute honor.
That's all right.
Thank you for spending so much time with me. I'd love to do it again. Can I we're going to sign off, guys. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure you give us a 5-star review. Make sure you follow Errol and all his journeys. Obviously, look at all his sons and what they're doing.